Tonight, at least a decade in jail for a man who killed his travel companion during a drunken fight on Eyre Peninsula. Also, gas giant Santos wins a legal battle over a controversial pipeline in the Timor Sea. Huge celebrations as Australia's princess becomes Denmark's queen. Lava threatens a town in Iceland after another volcanic eruption. And Alexei Popyrin triumphs at the Australian Open, setting up a clash with Novak Djokovic. Good evening, Jessica Harmsen with ABC News South Australia. The family of a man who was viciously bashed to death on South Australia's Eyre Peninsula says they're happy with the sentence his killer has been given. Adam Bennett was jailed for at least 10 years for killing Peter Hillier in what was described in court as an explosive and violent attack. Shari Hams reports.
An emotional day for the family of Peter Hillier in court to hear the punishment given to his attacker. Adam Troy Bennett was sentenced to 13 years in jail for manslaughter. The 45-year-old exploded with violence when he attacked Mr. Hillier behind a Putra art gallery in May 2022. An attack the judge said was at the higher end of seriousness and involved a senseless, savage beating of an older, weaker and infirm man who was dependent on you for his care. The two New South Wales men had been travelling through the Eyre Peninsula in a motorhome. A drunken fight broke out and Bennett tried to force Mr. Hillier into the vehicle. The victim's body was later found at a holiday home they were renting in Venus Bay. Bennett remained emotionless as the sentence was read out to cheers from Peter Hillier's sister. The family issuing a statement. We are relieved that the court process has now concluded for us, and though we are satisfied with the outcome, the sadness of losing our dear Peter will be with us always. Justice Sandy McDonald said Bennett gave conflicting evidence to police and a psychologist after his arrest. She said that was due to cognitive impairment, but he was also highly intoxicated during the crime. Bennett will be eligible for parole after 10 years. Shari Hams, ABC News.
The death of a South Australian police officer at a station last week will be referred to a parliamentary committee on police mental health. The sudden death of a female officer at Port Adelaide Police Station on January 8th isn't being treated as suspicious. Her death is the subject of a commissioner's inquiry and a coronial investigation and will now be examined by the Select Committee on Support and Mental Health Services for Police.
We can always do more to be able to advocate for our frontline workers, and unfortunately we've seen in the media quite frequently recently that more needs to be done, and I think it's the role of the Parliament to make sure that we're checking in every now and then to make sure that the safeguards, supports and protections that are in place for our frontline workers are still doing what they need to be doing.
And if you or someone you know is experiencing distress or depression, please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or get in touch via their website. The federal court has dismissed a legal case against gas company Santos, allowing construction of a $5.7 billion Barossa gas pipeline in the Timor Sea. Last year, a group of Tiwi elders and traditional owners had the project halted on cultural heritage grounds. But the court has ruled there was little evidence of archaeological sites near the pipeline route.
A massive offshore gas project back on track to begin production next year. The underwater pipeline from the Barossa gas field in the Timor Sea to export facilities in Darwin set to go ahead after a lengthy legal battle. With the federal court ruling, a group of Tiwi elders had not produced enough evidence of significant songlines in the pipeline's vicinity. In her findings, Justice Natalie Charlesworth concluded the evidence asserting that songlines relate to or extend into the area of sea country through which the pipeline will pass is insufficient. The 263-kilometre pipeline will start about 7 kilometres west of the Tiwi Islands and run underwater to Darwin, where it will be shipped as LNG to buyers in South Korea and Japan. A group of Tiwi Island elders challenged the project, claiming it could damage significant underwater cultural sites. Today, that challenge was dismissed.
We are very excited today that another hurdle for Santos has been removed and they can get on with providing an energy source into the territory that is worth $6 billion to our economy.
Santos has welcomed the court's decision, while Australian Energy Producers has gone a step further, labelling the case against Santos as lawfare and calling for the removal of what they say are ambiguities in the offshore regulatory scheme. Meanwhile, the small group of Tiwi elders that brought the case say they are hurting from the loss, with the court ordering them to cover Santos's legal costs. Oliver Chaseling, ABC News.
Foreign Minister Penny Wong has departed for a high-stakes trip to the Middle East to advocate for sustainable ceasefire in Israel and Gaza. The minister is flying to Jordan before heading to Israel, the West Bank and United Arab Emirates. She'll meet with survivors and families of Israeli hostages, but despite growing pressure from the opposition, hasn't committed to visiting the site of the October 7 attack. There are also calls from within the Albanese government to take a firmer stand on Israeli settler violence in the West Bank, including imposing sanctions.
Settler violence in the occupied Palestinian territories must be condemned, and we do so. And in our efforts to use our voice to advocate for a pathway out of this conflict, we have made very clear that one of the priorities must be to avoid regional escalation.
Australia's second largest port operator is calling on the federal government to intervene in an industrial dispute. The company, DP World, claims shipping delays have cost the economy more than $1 billion. The government's agreed to a meeting but hasn't said whether it will step in.
The next batch of fruit at this warehouse might not be so fresh. Joe Saina imports produce which he says is now perishing in containers at docks across the country.
We've got fresh fruits and vegetables trying to arrive for the Chinese New Year in the first week of February, and they've been held up because of disputes at one of our major stevedores.
Australia's second largest port operator, DP World, is suffering from major disruptions at its port terminals in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Fremantle because of an industrial dispute with unions.
We've got duopolies and we've got some companies that have a lot of market power and they've been able to use that monopsony power to keep wages low.
The Maritime Union of Australia wants a 16% pay rise for more than 1,500 workers over 2 years. In a breakthrough for DP World, the union has halted bans on certain shipping lines but is still going ahead with 2-hour pauses on work. The company says the stoppages have pushed delivery times of some essential items behind by at least 2 to 8 weeks, with a backlog of more than 50,000 containers sitting at Australian ports. Without releasing the economic modelling behind its claims, DP World says since October, the industrial action has cost the economy $1.34 billion.
This additional cost could be passed to the consumers and leading to higher inflation.
DP World wants the government to intervene.
There is a significant amount of industrial action ongoing that rolls over week after week, and that means that we cannot service all our customers.
Industrial Relations Minister Tony Burke will meet with DP World later this week in a push to get the company and the union to reach an agreement as soon as possible. Nassim Khadem, ABC News.
It's a fairy tale story for the ages. An Australian girl who married a prince has today become a queen. Tens of thousands of people lined the streets of Copenhagen to watch Queen Margrethe II hand over the Danish throne to her son, King Frederik X. His Tasmanian-born wife, Mary Donaldson, is now Queen Consort of Denmark. And just like the couple's wedding, this fairy tale moment was sealed with a kiss. Europe correspondent Isabella Higgins reports from Copenhagen.
It was meant to be just a simple ceremony, but the crowds arrived on a grand scale. The new king steps onto the balcony of Christiansborg Palace in central Copenhagen. Welcomed by a sea of red and white flags, he's moved to tears. The Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, proclaimed him King Frederik X with a 9-fold salute. In his first public address as monarch, he paid tribute to his mother and said he'd need the support of his Australian-born wife, Mary.
Today, the throne is passed on. My hope is to become a unifying king of tomorrow. It is a task I have approached all my life. It is a task I take on with pride, respect, and great joy.
Moments earlier, Queen Margrethe arrived at the palace, ending her more than 50-year rule on her terms. Signing the instrument of abdication and announcing God save the King. Frederick's much-loved wife Mary is the first Australian to become a reigning queen. The couple were joined briefly on the balcony by their 4 children, including the new heir, Crown Prince Christian. And a final raucous applause for a royal kiss. Among the sea of Danish flags, some cheering Australians.
Aussie, Aussie, Aussie! Oi, oi, oi! So, I'm not sure how far, but we travelled for about 24 hours.
I don't think there's many common Australians that will end up a future king or queen in any country around the world.
I think some people call that the Mary effect. I think it's because it's added a new dimension to the relationship. It's created a sense of admiration and affection between the people of Australia and Denmark.
The couple returning to their royal residence by horse-drawn carriage.
The King and Queen come to the throne with enormous popularity, and there's a great sense of excitement about what this new royal reign will look like.
I've got a champagne bottle and I'm just out here with some friends, just marking the King's Day, the celebration of the King and the royal family.
Fireworks ended a day of festivities celebrating King Frederick X and his Australian Queen.
So what's next for the new King and Queen? Isabella Higgins has this update from Copenhagen.
Well, Denmark is waking up to its first full day under the reign of King Frederick X, and things look a little different today at Christiansborg Palace, but there is still one more celebration on the agenda. The King and Queen are due back here for a formal reception with the country's lawmakers. This building actually houses the Danish Parliament, so inside later today, the Danish Prime Minister and the Speaker of the House will formally welcome the new monarch, of course acknowledging them as the head of state, as the overseer of the country's constitution. But what else is on the agenda for the royal couple? We know they've got lots of interest, lots of causes in which they are hoping to champion in their new roles. We can expect to see some of that in the weeks and months ahead.
Isabella Higgins reporting there. To the US election, and candidates vying for the Republican presidential nomination are making their final appeals to voters in the state of Iowa. The caucus there is the first big test in the race for the White House. And former President Donald Trump is tipped to hold a massive lead over his rivals. North America correspondent Jade McMillan is in Indianola, Iowa.
Temperatures below minus 25 degrees Celsius haven't deterred Donald Trump's supporters.
I'm here to see a great man, a man that makes our country the best.
It's a little chilly, but being from Iowa, it's I'm kind of used to it.
The former president is widely expected to easily win the Iowa caucus, the first chance for Republicans to vote on who they want to contest November's presidential election.
Once you set foot in that caucus site, the entire world will be listening to you, and I believe that Iowa is going to speak loud and clear.
His main opponents, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and former United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley, are likely jostling for second.
We're going to keep on going anywhere and everywhere. We're going to go all the way until the last hour.
Neither candidate is showing any sign of dropping out of the race.
Our voters are very motivated. I think it's very hard to poll an Iowa caucus period, which the 16 poll was not accurate predicted, but especially one in negative 20 degrees.
People in Iowa are used to the cold, but this is severe even by their standards. And the caucus rules require voters to show up in person on what will be a freezing night, meaning turnout could be affected.
There's still plenty of vocal anti-Trump sentiment here.
I'm very afraid if he comes back into power. It leaves a lot of uncertainty for how the rest of us are going to fare. in this country.
But the results in Iowa could fuel the idea that his campaign is unstoppable. Jade McMillan, ABC News, Indianola, Iowa.
Almost 4,000 people have been evacuated from a town in southwest Iceland after a nearby volcano erupted for the second time in less than a month. Lava flowed into a local community and set several buildings on fire.
Iceland has more than 30 active volcanoes, but images like this are rare. This is Grindavik, a fishing town in the country's southwest, under siege from lava.
It's a bit of a weird feeling to see a town being destroyed almost in slow motion at this point.
After a swarm of small earthquakes on Saturday, Grindavik's 3,800 residents evacuated. Just hours later, there was an eruption which opened large cracks in the ground and sent lava snaking towards the community.
Some houses has burned or be buried under the lava, and it's still going quite strong into the town, so we see that the potential damage will be quite much.
Grindavik was first evacuated last November after a series of earthquakes, but residents returned home just before Christmas. Authorities raced to build long defensive walls in case of an eruption, walls that kept the lava out at first.
But then around noon we had a new shock when a fissure opened within the town, and there is lava flowing up from that fissure. Already several houses have gone under lava, so it's a very serious situation.
The government will meet in the next 24 hours to discuss emergency housing for a population who won't be heading home anytime soon. Zoe Ford, ABC News.
When it comes to maintaining a healthy brain, it's well known that avoiding smoking and alcohol and having a healthy diet are important. But there are other ways to reduce the risk of cognitive impairment that are less understood, like socialising, getting good sleep and even hormone replacement therapy for women. Fiona Blackwood reports.
These women are doing two things to reduce their risk of dementia as they age. Turn them over. The first is challenging their brains with a puzzle.
My grandmother used to do a lot of crosswords as well as the puzzles, and she had a very active brain right up until she passed. So yeah, that is something that's always in the back of my mind, to keep your brain ticking over.
The second is socialising.
If you can actually socialise with other people while doing your puzzles, that you can reduce your anxiety levels.
Socialising is incredibly important for the brain, although we don't really understand how this works. And maybe it's through release of other neurotransmitters in the brain, including oxytocin and dopamine, that enhance brain function longer term.
Deep sleep is important too for activating the glymphatic system, which cleans out toxins from the brain. And a new study has found hormone replacement therapy, taken when menopause symptoms begin, may reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease in women.
So that's something that's cutting edge and obviously needs to be explored in greater detail.
There are other more well-known ways to prevent cognitive degeneration, like daily exercise, a healthy diet and not smoking.
John Moore's mother had dementia.
So she passed away at quite an early age, so it's amazing the effect it has on you, you know. It's a very sad thing. It's sad for the person and very hard for the family.
He's taking part in a study.
So just do it as big, as fast as you can.
Which uses artificial intelligence to pick up subtle changes in a person's movements, which could indicate early signs of neurodegeneration.
Potentially many years before you might develop the obvious symptoms of dementia.
If a risk is identified, participants are encouraged to consider ways to reduce it.
Having a healthy vascular system, so that means physical activity, looking after your blood pressure, obesity and so forth.
Maintaining a healthy brain with age. Fiona Blackwood, ABC News.
Coming up on 7:30 with Laura Tingle, the aftermath of the deadly PNG riots.
We've lost everything.
The entire city was shut off, no businesses, and we saw people, the very people who stole from the shops, and they were suffering as well.
We have to do our best to find out who are behind it.
Also, I'll speak to the former Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, Peter O'Neill.
On to finance now, and the number of jobs being advertised has fallen sharply. David Chow explains.
Despite a big slowdown in consumer spending, the jobs market is still holding up surprisingly well. The number of jobs being advertised right now is about 36% higher than it was 4 years ago, when COVID didn't even exist. But it's getting a little bit harder to find work, according to analysis from ANZ and Indeed. The number of job ads has dropped 15% over the past year, as the red line shows. Now, this data from Seek also tells a similar story. Manufacturing, hospitality and retail are some of the industries with the most advertised opportunities. But still, the number of job ads in those industries has fallen sharply, like IT and communication, which is down 32% in the past year. Based on this, we can expect the unemployment rate to rise in the coming months. Meanwhile, it was a quiet day for the All Ords, which barely moved. Sandhos's shares, meanwhile, jumped after it won a federal court case against Tiwi elders who were trying to stop Santos from laying a pipeline near their islands off northern Australia. But the best performers were uranium stocks like Boss Energy and Paladin Energy. It's because the price of uranium surged to its highest level since 2007. And what helped is that more than 20 countries like the US and UK declaring last month they would triple their nuclear energy capacity by the year 2050. Overseas, Japan's stock market hit a fresh 34-year high. And there were big rises for oil and gold, while iron ore prices fell sharply. And finally, the Aussie dollar is buying just under 67 US cents. And that's finance.
In tennis, Australia's Alexei Popyrin has set up a second-round Australian Open clash against defending champion Novak Djokovic. Popyrin's straight sets win over countryman Mark Polmans came on a day of mixed fortunes for local hopes and some shaky moments for the tournament's top seeds.
A storm is brewing at Melbourne Park.
She's done it!
A world number one in doubles, Storm Hunter had never won an Australian Open match as a singles player. Now she's through to the second round.
It's a dream come true. I've been kind of waiting for it for a few years.
Alexei Popyrin has also progressed after outclassing compatriot Mark Polmans in straight sets. His next opponent, Novak Djokovic.
I last played him when I was 19. I've improved since then.
Daria Saville has been knocked out after losing to Poland's Magdalena Frech in a three-set battle. 6'6" Russian Daniil Medvedev made the most of his long limbs. After losing the opening set, Medvedev won the next two, before his opponent, Terence Atman, was forced to retire hurt.
That might be it.
There was also an early scare for last year's men's finalist.
Now is my time.
Lowly ranked Belgian Zizou Bergs stunned 7th seed Stefanos Tsitsipas in the opening set. The Greek star had to reach into his bag of tricks to get back on track.
Oh, has he made it? Is it legit?
I've seen it, but I do not believe it.
Tsitsipas rallying to win in 4. No such luck for reigning Wimbledon champion Marketa Vondrousova, who was blown away in straight sets by Ukrainian qualifier Diana Yastremska.
Emphatic victory for the qualifier.
So much for no late-night starts. It was almost midnight when defending champion Arina Sabalenka walked out onto Rod Laver Arena. But for the crowd that stayed, the match only lasted 53 minutes. It was a contrasting Grand Slam debut for Dino Prismic. Half the age of Djokovic, Prismic pushed the 10-time champion in 4 grueling sets.
For an 18-year-old, he played so maturely and so confidently on the court.
Tom Maddox, ABC News, Melbourne Park.
Australia all-rounder Cameron Green admits he thought he was a 95% chance of opening the batting on his return to the Test team before learning Steve Smith would take the role. Instead, Green will slot in at number 4 for the first Test against the West Indies in Adelaide starting on Wednesday, and he says he couldn't be happier.
The debate surrounding who would open dominated headlines and divided opinions for days. And Cameron Green was convinced he'd be tasked with the role.
Yeah, I thought it was about 95% chance of opening, so that's where my head went for a couple of weeks, and yeah, grateful to be at 4.
Green will return in the position he feels most comfortable in, having been away from the Test side since being squeezed out during the Ashes.
It had been a whirlwind couple of years, and hadn't really had a chance to sit down and think about my own game and where it can go from here. So, yeah, there's always a silver lining with not being in the team and having a bit of time in the nets to kind of work on my own game.
The West Indies offered little resistance in last summer's 2 tests against Australia and have brought an inexperienced squad on this tour. But they insist expectations are high.
We expect to come in and give them a challenge. We're here to win 2 test matches. We're not just here to play. So we're going to come out here and give it our best.
While this summer's Adelaide test brings the same opponent, there's a switch from last summer's day-nighter back to the daytime and from December to January. But for the ground staff, the goal is the same.
How do we get a contest between bat and ball and provide a surface for the players to go and hopefully shine on it?
All eyes will be on Smith as one of Australia's most successful test batters takes on a new role. Blake Kagi, ABC News.
The Adelaide Strikers have locked in a spot in the Men's Big Bash League finals after a 9-wicket win over the Sydney Thunder in Canberra. Batting first, the Thunder was dismissed for 140, with David Warner making just 13 runs for Sydney and Lloyd Pope taking 4 wickets for Adelaide. In reply, the Strikers only lost 1 wicket in their run chase. Strikers captain Matt Short was unbeaten on 74 runs. Short made BBL history, becoming the highest run scorer in a 10-match regular season, having notched up 509 runs so far at an average of more than 72.
The proudest thing is I've been scoring at most venues rather than just the beautiful Adelaide Oval. You come to some slower wickets and some slower outfields here.
Australian road and time trial champion Luke Plapp says forecast heat will be to his advantage as the men's Tour Down Under gets underway tomorrow. The riders fronted the media in the lead up to the 144-kilometre first stage in the Barossa Valley, which will start and finish in Tanunda. Plapp is up against the likes of 2-time world champion and 6-time Tour de France stage winner Julien Alaphilippe, who says he's relaxed and ready to race. But the Australian says he'll be better placed to deal with temperatures in the 30s than those who've just flown in from the European winter.
I love the heat and also to be able to spend the last 3 months here in the heat, whether these guys have been in cold Europe. I'm really looking forward to it. I think every time I get in the Hilton lift and check the weather, it's getting hotter and hotter, which makes me very excited.
Let's take a look at what the weather has in store for us this week. But first, tonight's photo from Paul Hunt was taken at Sellex Beach. It was hot and dry across Adelaide today. In the city, the mercury rose to 34.9 degrees at 4:30 this afternoon after an overnight low of 20. Further afield, there were early morning gusty winds about western slopes of the ranges and some southern coastal areas. Thundery showers developed across northern parts of the state this afternoon. It was a scorching 44 degrees in Oodnadatta. Cloud over the top end of the country in tropical lows, and a monsoon trough is causing heavy rain and storms. Other troughs, onshore winds and a front will continue to drive showers and storms over WA, eastern areas of our state, Western Victoria, New South Wales and eastern Queensland, while maintaining heat in the west. So, wet weather's forecast tomorrow for the major centres along the eastern seaboard down to the national capital, but it'll be fine and windy in Melbourne with 30 degrees, sunny and 29 for Hobart. Back home, isolated showers and thunderstorms possible over most districts with severe storms and local heavy falls about the pastorals, 38 degrees for Cooper Pedy. The mid-north and the eastern districts in the south will cop rain and some storms, but it'll be fine on KI with 31 degrees for Kingscote, a top of 29 in Port Lincoln. A severe heat wave warning remains in place for the northwest pastoral district. There's a slight chance of a shower from late morning in the hills and southern suburbs tomorrow, with a possible storm in the northern suburbs later in the day. 33 degrees for the city after a low of 24. On the waters, variable winds tending south to southwesterly to 20 knots late afternoon, with seas to 1 metre around midday. The sun will rise around 6:15 and set soon after 8:30. A cool change will bring a mild day on Wednesday with 24 degrees before heating up again, 30 on Friday, 34 Saturday and 35 degrees by this time next week. And that's the latest from the Adelaide newsroom. Thanks very much for your company. Stay with us. Laura Tingle's next with 7:30.